Hi. Happy Wednesday. We are over halfway through the month. Hello, Farm Mouse. It's the 18th already. Sharkies! Oh, everybody's here. I mean, not everybody, but everybody who matters. Oh. Benebic's here. That's who I was talking about when I said everybody who matters. How is your Wednesday treating you? Anything new and interesting? How did your somewhat belated Christmas dinner go? How were the pierogies and the like all I can think of is cabbage coleslaw. I know it's not that. Cheek looks shiny. I had a shower today, but look at that. Those shiny cheeks. What's going on there? You went? You went? Oh. While you were getting ready for did you miss my question? How did Christmas go? How did the pierogies and the cabbage rolls that weren't rolls turn out? How did everything work? While you were casserole, while you were getting ready for that, I was moving out our roommate, who is officially into his new place. So that's exciting. I think he quite enjoys it so far. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. That's well, postpone's okay. So you're gonna have Ukrainian Christmas on Lunar New Year. You can say Merry Christmas and Happy Year of the Rabbit all at once. Ooh, that's a bit sweet. I'm going to be doing some lion dancing this weekend to celebrate Lunar New Year. Um, with my Kung Fu school. You're getting really over this winter. Ugh. Yeah, it's been not the best start to 2023 as far as health goes for any of us, really. But it sounds like your family has had it kind of rough. But yeah, Saturday I'm going to be doing some lion dancing or helping with lion dancing in some form. I think I'll be doing a little dancing myself and maybe some symbols or something like that at Coquitlam Center on Saturday, and then at a Hard Rock Casino on Sunday. Mm-hmm. What time? Let's see. Good question. Just follow the sound of the drums. No, I don't know specifically where it's going to be. Did we do Coquitlam's? We did a mall before. I don't remember if it was Coquitlam Center. And we were in sort of a... I mean, it's going to be in some sort of like foyer type... Not foyer. Like if they've got, I don't know, an open space somewhere in the mall itself, like in the halls. It's not in a specific shop. And let's see. I think the lion dance itself is going to be around noon. 12 or 12:30 at Coquitlam Center. Something like that. I think that's when it's going to be. That'd be fun. Yeah, it's a good time. It's hopefully a good performance, and it's fun, and it's a good way to maybe get a little luck for the new year. So, speaking of Christmas, our mutual friend, Eriker, um, gave me a little bit of a present. So there's a small amount of backstory to it. Are you familiar with the Starlight Barking? The sequel, as it says, to the 101 Dalmatians. Now, I've never read either book myself. Of course, I've seen the Disney. I haven't seen the live action, but I've seen the Disney cartoon. Only, yeah, exactly. That's about as much as I know as well. Is I've read a bit of a synopsis of it. I mean, there was a post going around about it, and after that I went and read the actual, like, plot synopsis off of, I don't know, Wikipedia or something like that. But it's just, like, from what I know of 101 Dalmatians, there's a family that gets some Dalmatians that have way too many puppies, and then a crazy lady wants to kill the dogs for fashion, right? That's what I know about the first book. I don't know how accurate that is to the book itself. That's what I know from the movie. And then in the sequel, everyone on Earth falls asleep. Right? Not just all humans, as far as I'm aware. The back of this says every living creature except dogs is gripped by an enchanted sleep. And so naturally, the dogs take over Parliament, because someone's gotta, right? And also, all of the dogs can fly for some reason, and also are long-range telepathic, I guess. There's a lot going on. It doesn't seem to be a very long book. And it does have some illustrations. It's, it's 147 pages long. So it's not... And, like, I mean, that's with fairly large print and illustrations. So maybe we should read that at some point. Oh boy. Yeah. So, we haven't been making a lot of progress on this recently. Since I busted out the bingo stamp, the, like, actual bingo stamp, we've only gotten 2 spaces. Faldor's farm, and head injury. There have been a few that have been close, right? And I mean, Garion getting cocky. I feel like we glossed over the part where he was talking to the Tolnedron ambassador. That, I don't know if that counted as cockiness or not, but it was almost more of a frustration, I think. Oh, but you know what? I'm pretty sure Polgara did chastise Garion about manners. Like twice, didn't she? I think she did. I think we need to fill in that space. Because he told her to put down her sewing and talk to him, and at which point she did the whole, like, yes, your majesty, and then when he said, you know, not you too, she said, well, then don't make demands, don't issue commands. That was kind of chastising about manners. And then I think she also, prior to that, chastised him about the tone that he took with the Tolnedron ambassador. Yeah. I'm willing to drop the cocky one because I didn't quite feel like it fits. But I am fairly certain that he had been chastised by Polgara about his manners. So, unless there's any objections, let me just... I feel like I should go back to those bits just to... Let's see. So, after the ambassador had departed, Polgara said, it was, "Don't be surly, dear," she replied calmly. "It was a trifle impolite, though. Are you really sure you want to take that tone with your future father-in-law?" So there was that. And then there was the part with the sewing. Which was, you know, "And what did your majesty wish to discuss?" she inquired. "Aunt Pole," Garion's voice was stricken. "Not you too." "Don't give orders then, dear." So, I think that we missed that before. That needs a stamp. Any objections? 10 seconds. 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Sounds good. Other than that, we really haven't seen Mandaralin at all for quite a while. We've barely seen Belgarath, like, since he presented Garion to everyone on the day they returned the orb. I don't think he's made an appearance, which is a little odd. Likewise, Relg and Taiba we haven't seen since before that. And Mandaralin. I guess technically we did see basically everybody during that moment, as Garion kind of looked around at them all. Yeah. No word because we haven't seen him. There hasn't been very much usage of magic, so that rules those out. Garion hasn't really had the opportunity to do any eavesdropping. And I don't think we've seen enough of Silk for him to be a rogue or to be very sarcastic. We have seen him a bit, but he was just kind of... He was not fully himself in that situation. Mrs. still thinks that we've had him stay in uncomfortable situations. Are you specifically thinking of the bit with Leldoran, or are you thinking of his whole being a king? Both. Okay. Plus, there's the whole situation with, I don't know. Anytime he has to hang around servants calling him Majesty. Those are definitely uncomfortable moments. I just can't help but think of, like, when he had to stay with um, Mandaralan and Mandaralan's adoptive father's lady. Mister thinks we're still waiting for the culmination of the kingly discomfort. The kingly discomfort. That sounds like some kind of euphemism. I don't know what for, but... Oh boy. Something, something crown jewels. What does Farmmouse think about the uncomfortable situation for Garion? Why don't you be the tiebreaker on whether or not we stamp that in right now? Oh. I'm sorry, Mrs. Sharkey. You've been outvoted. I don't think anyone strictly disagrees. I think we're all just waiting for a more just like a situation rather than just things that Garion's not happy about. The Leldorn thing is close, but all they really did was kind of, I don't know, love each other. They didn't really, like, do or say anything other than look at each other a bit. And he didn't really have to stay there either. Like, he wasn't stuck. He's stuck being a king, but that's, I don't know, that's too much of a huge plot thing. Like, that's his whole destiny. Alright, well, let's see. So, quite a bit happened in chapter 13. It was a little bit of a longer chapter, I feel like. There was the whole bit with the ambassador. And then Garion had a knife thrown at his back. Quite hard. Hard enough to kick up sparks and bend the point of the knife. Yeah, there is that. So after that, he had a chat with Leldoran because we have a scrap of a corner of a cloak, a Reven cloak, as our primary clue. He had a chat with Brand, who was playing the harp, and Brand explained how all Reven warders take up the name of Brand and aren't allowed to use their own names or any other sort of personal signifiers as far as we're aware. Right, a bard. Brand the bard. His name even contains the letters for bard. Just have to lose the N and shuffle the A and the R around. Um, so Garion went to make sure that Bard wasn't holding any hard feelings, that Brand wasn't holding any hard feelings, um, and to see if he's doing all right, if Garion's doing all right. Then he went and had another chat with his aunt. Talked about how he really didn't want to have to do all this. Didn't even know all the rest of his family. And then she did some summoning of spirits. And Garion had a chat, sort of, with his parents and then his ultimate grandmothers, as it were. Look at this pup down here. Look at this guy. And that's where chapter 13 ended. Oh, you. So, that brings us to chapter 14. In my copy, it's on page 129 for all the good that does you. Ready? Okay. It was... Are we halfway? It's hard for me to tell because we're probably more than halfway, because this is actually both Castle of Wizardry and Enchanter's Endgame. So I don't know where in this book specifically Castle of Wizardry ends and where it switches to Enchanter's Endgame. Oh, okay. It's right here. So, yeah, I think we might be slightly over halfway eyeballing it. In my copy, we're on page 129 out of 246. So, yeah, that puts us slightly over halfway. Okay, so it was the first day of spring, and King Belgarion of Riva was terribly nervous. We're out of winter. He had watched the approach of Princess Sinedra's 16th birthday with a steadily mounting anxiety, and now that the day had finally arrived, he hovered on the very edge of panic. It is interesting. He's had his whole coronation and everything, and on Aristide she had to present herself, but they're not actually supposed to be, I don't know, wed? I suppose at this point they're betrothed, but maybe she actually has to... No, she has to present herself on her 16th birthday. So I guess she just had to be there for Aristide, but that wasn't her presenting herself. Yeah. He had watched the approach of Princess Sinedra's 16th birthday with a steadily mounting anxiety, and now that the day had finally arrived, he hovered on the very edge of panic. The deep blue brocade doublet over which a half-dozen tailors had labored for weeks still did not seem to feel just right. Somehow it was a bit tight across the shoulders, and the stiff collar scratched his neck. Moreover, His gold crown seemed unusually heavy on this particular day, and, as he fidgeted, his throne seemed even more uncomfortable than usual. The hall of the Raven King had been decorated extensively for the occasion, but even the banners and garlands of pale spring flowers could not mask the ominous starkness of the great throne room. The assembled notables, however, chatted and laughed among themselves, as if nothing significant were taking place. Garion felt rather bitter about their heartless lack of concern in the face of what was about to happen to him. What was about to happen to him? Aunt Pole stood at the left side of his throne. Excuse me. What? You want snack? You want snack? Is it good? Aunt Pole stood at the left side of his throne, garbed in a new silver gown, and with a silver circlet about her hair. Belgarath, oh there he is, lounged indolently on the right, wearing a new green doublet, which had already become rumpled. There's that word again. Don't squirm so much, dear, Aunt Pole told Garion calmly. That's easy enough for you to say, Garion retorted in an accusing tone. Try not to think about it, Belgarath advised. It'll all be over in a little while. Then Brand, his face seeming even more bleak than usual, entered the hall from the side door and came to the dais. What was Brand's voice like again? There's a Nissen at the gate of the citadel, your majesty, he said quietly. He says that he's an emissary of Queen Selmisra, and that he's here to witness the ceremony. Isn't that impossible? Garion asked Aunt Pole, startled by the warder's surprising announcement. Not entirely, she replied. More likely, though, it's a diplomatic fiction. I'd imagine that the Nissens would prefer to keep Selmisra's condition a secret. What do I do? Garion asked. Belgarath shrugged. Let him in. In here? Brand's voice was shocked. A Nissen in the throne room? Belgarath, you're not serious? Garion is Overlord of the West, Brand, the old man replied, and that includes Nyssa. I don't imagine that the snake people will be much use to us at any time, but let's be polite at least. Brand's face went stiff with disapproval. What is your majesty's decision? He asked Garion directly. Well, Garion hesitated. Let him come in, I guess. Don't vacillate, Garion. Vacillate? V-A-C-I-L-L-A-T-E. Vacillate? Vacillate? I'm not sure. I'm assuming it means don't be wishy-washy. Just based on context. But I don't know that I've seen it used too many more times than this. Don't vacillate, Garion, Aunt Pole told him firmly. I'm sorry, Garion said quickly. And don't apologize, she added. Kings don't apologize. I suppose this is more of a lecture on bearing rather than manners, maybe. Look at this guy. Why don't you settle down, Bin? Lay down. That's a dumb rule. Kings don't apologize? He looked at her helplessly. Then he turned back to Brand. Tell the emissary from Nyssa to join us, he said, though his tone was placating. By the way, Brand, Belgarath suggested, I wouldn't let anyone get too excited about this. The Nyssen has ambassadorial status, and it'd be a serious breach of protocol if he died unexpectedly. Brand bowed rather stiffly, turned, and left the hall. Was that really necessary, Father? Aunt Pole asked. Old grudges die hard, Pole, Belgarath replied. Sometimes it's best to get everything right out in front so that there aren't any misunderstandings later. Yeah. When the emissary of the Snake Queen entered the hall, Garion started with surprise. Who do you think it is? It was Sadi, the chief eunuch in Salmisra's palace. Surprise! One of like four Nissans. At least out of the palace. Look at that guy. The thin man with the dead-looking eyes and shaved head wore the customary iridescent blue-green Nissen robe, and he bowed sinuously as he approached the throne. Greetings to His Majesty, Belgarion of Riva, from eternal Salmisra, Queen of the Snake People, he intoned in his peculiarly contralto voice. Welcome, Sadi, Garion replied formally. My queen sends her regards on this happy day, Sadi continued. She didn't really, did she? Garion asked, a bit pointedly. Not precisely, Your Majesty, Sadi admitted without the least trace of embarrassment. I'm sure she would have, however, if we'd been able to make her understand what was happening. How is she? Garion remembered the dreadful transformation Salmisra had undergone. Difficult, Sadi answered blandly. Of course, that's nothing new. Fortunately, she sleeps for a week or two after she's been fed. She molted last month, and it made her dreadfully short-tempered. He rolled his eyes ceilingward. It was ghastly, he murmured. She bit 3 servants before it was over. They all died immediately, of course. She's venomous? Garion was a bit startled at that. She's always been venomous, Your Majesty. That's not the way I meant. I mean. Forgive my little joke, Sadi apologized. Judging from the reactions of people she's bitten, I'd guess that she's at least 10 times more deadly than a common cobra. Is she terribly unhappy? Garion felt a strange pity for the hideously altered queen. That's really rather hard to say, Your Majesty, Sadi replied clinically. It's difficult to tell what a snake's really feeling, you understand. By the time she'd learned to communicate her wishes to us, she seemed to have become reconciled to her new form. We feed her and keep her clean. As long as she has her mirror and someone to bite when she's feeling peevish, she seems quite content. She still looks at herself in the mirror? I wouldn't think she'd want to now. Our race has a somewhat different view of the serpent, Your Majesty, Sadi explained. We find it a rather attractive creature, and our queen is a splendid-looking snake after all. Her new skin is quite lovely, and she seems very proud of it. He turned and bowed deeply to Aunt Pole. Lady Polgara, he greeted her. Sadi, she acknowledged with a brief nod. May I convey to you the heartfelt thanks of Her Majesty's government? One of Aunt Pole's eyebrows rose inquiringly. The government, my lady, not the Queen herself. Your, intervention, shall we say, has simplified things in the palace enormously. We no longer have to worry about Sal Misra's whims and peculiar appetites. We rule by committee, and we hardly ever find it necessary to poison each other any more. No one's tried to poison me for months. It's all very smooth and civilized in this tour now. He glanced briefly at Garion. May I also offer my congratulations on your success with His Majesty? He seems to have matured considerably. He was really very callow when last we met. Whatever happened to Isis? Garion asked him, ignoring that particular observation. Sadi shrugged. Isis? Oh, he's still about, scratching out a living as a paid assassin, probably. I imagine that one day we'll find him floating face down in the river. It's the sort of end one expects from someone like that. There was a sudden blare of trumpets from just beyond the great doors at the back of the hall. Garion started nervously, and his mouth quite suddenly went dry. The heavy doors swung open, and a double file of Tolnedran legionnaires marched in, their breastplates burnished until they shone like mirrors, and the tall crimson plumes on their helmets waving as they marched. The inclusion of the legionnaires in the ceremony had infuriated Brand. The Reven Warder had stalked about in icy silence for days after he had discovered that Garion had granted Ambassador Valgan's request for a proper escort for Princess Sinedra. Brand did not like Tolnedrans, and he had been looking forward to witnessing the pride of the Empire humbled by Sinedra's forlorn and solitary entrance into the hall. Brand, come on now. That's a little unnecessary, isn't it? The presence of the legionnaires spoiled that, of course, and Brand's disappointment and disapproval had been painfully obvious. As much as Garion wanted to stay on Brand's good side, however, he did not intend to start off the official relationship between his bride-to-be and himself by publicly humiliating her. Garion was quite ready to acknowledge his lack of education, but he was not prepared to admit to being that stupid. That's good. That's good. When Senedra entered, her hand lesting. All that satty sibilance has made my tongue bleh. Ah. That's fair, yeah. Alright, let's try this again. When Senedra entered, Clarisps. When Senedra entered, her hand resting lightly on Valgon's arm, she was every inch an imperial princess. Garion could only gape at her. Although the accords of Vomimbre required that she present herself in her wedding gown, Garion was totally unprepared for such imperial magnificence. Her gown was of gold and white brocade, covered with seed pearls, and its train swept the floor behind her. Her flaming hair was intricately curled and cascaded over her left shoulder like a deep crimson waterfall. Her circlet of tinted gold held in place a short veil that did not so much conceal her face as soften it into luminousness. She was tiny and perfect, exquisite beyond belief, but her eyes were like little green agates. She and Valgon moved at a stately pace down between the ranks of her tall, burnished legionnaires. When they reached the front of the hall, they stopped. Brand, sober-faced and imposing, took his staff of office from Bralon, B-R-A-L-O-N, Bralon, his eldest son, and rapped sharply on the stone floor with its butt 3 times. "Her Imperial Highness, Senedra of the Tolnedran Empire," he announced in a deep, booming voice. "Will your Majesty grant her audience?" "I will receive the princess," Garion declared, straightening a bit on his throne. "The Princess Senedra may approach the throne," Brand proclaimed. Though his words were ritual formality, they had obviously been chosen with great care to make it absolutely clear that Imperial Tolnedra came to the hall of the Revan King as a suppliant. Suppliant? S-U-P-P-L-I-A-N-T. I'm having a tough time with a few words in this chapter. I think it's suppliant. Senedra's eyes flashed fire, and Garion groaned inwardly. Suppliant? The little princess, however, glided to the appointed spot before the dais and curtsied regally. There was no submission in that gesture. "The princess has permission to speak," Brand boomed. For a brief, irrational moment, Garion wanted to strangle him. Senedra drew herself up, her face as cold as a winter sea. "Thus I, Senedra, daughter to Ranborun the 23rd," had to do some quick mental math on Roman numerals there, "and Princess of Imperial Tolnedra, present myself as required by treaty and law in the presence of His Majesty, Belgarion of Riva, she declared. And thus has the Tolnedran Empire once more demonstrated her willingness to fulfill her obligations as set forth in the Accords of Vomimbre. Let other kingdoms witness Tolnedra's meticulous response and follow her example in meeting their obligations. I declare before these witnesses that I am an unmarried virgin of a suitable age. Will His Majesty consent to take me to wife? Garion's reply had been carefully thought out. The quiet inner voice had suggested a way to head off years of marital discord. He rose to his feet and said, I, Belgarion, King of Riva, hereby consent to take the imperial Princess Senedra to be my wife and queen. I declare, moreover, that she will rule jointly by my side in Riva and wheresoever else the authority of our throne may extend. The gasp that rippled through the hall was clearly audible, and Bran's face went absolutely white. The look Senedra gave Garion was quizzical, and her eyes softened slightly. Your Majesty is too kind. Yeah, yeah, when you mentioned it before, I was like, oh, just wait another page. Your Majesty is too kind, she responded with a graceful little curtsy. Some of the edge had gone out of her voice, and she threw a quick sidelong glance at the spluttering Brand. Have I your Majesty's permission to withdraw? She asked sweetly. As your Highness wishes, Garion replied, sinking back down onto his throne. He was perspiring heavily. The princess curtsied again with a mischievous little twinkle in her eyes, then turned and left the hall with her legionnaires drawn up in close order about her. As the great doors boomed shut behind her, an angry buzz ran through the crowd. The word outrageous seemed to be the most frequently repeated. This is unheard of, Your Majesty, Brand protested. Not entirely, Garion replied defensively. The throne of Erendia is held jointly by King Corodulin and Queen Maya Serena. He looked to, Mandoralin, gleaming in his armor, with a mute appeal in his eyes. His Majesty speaks truly, my Lord Brand, Mandoralin declared. I assure thee that our kingdom suffers not from the lack of singularity upon the throne. That's Erendia, Brand objected. This is Riva. The situations are entirely different. No Alorn kingdom has ever been ruled by a woman. It might not hurt to examine the possible advantages of the situation, King Rodar suggested. My own queen, for example, plays a somewhat more significant role in Drasnian affairs than custom strictly allows. With great difficulty, Brand regained at least some of his composure. May I withdraw, Your Majesty? He asked, his face still livid. If you wish, Garion answered quietly. It wasn't going well. Brand's conservatism was the one stumbling block he hadn't considered. It's an interesting notion, dear, Aunt Pole said quietly to him. But don't you think it might have been better to consult with someone before you made it a public declaration? Won't it help to cement relations with the Tolnedrans? Quite possibly, she admitted. I'm not saying that it's a bad idea, Garion. I just think it might have been better to warn a few people first. What are you laughing at? She demanded of Belgarath, who was leaning against the throne, convulsed with mirth. The bear cult's going to have collective apoplexy, he chortled. Her eyes widened slightly. Oh, dear, she said. I'd forgotten about them. They aren't going to like it very much, are they? Garion concluded. Particularly since Senedra's a Tolnedran. I think you can count on them to go up in flames, the old sorcerer replied, still laughing. Well, you say that, and then he mentions the bear cult. Oops. And Garion does something unexpected, everybody. Apparently, even to his aunt and grandfather. Well, we are one very easy spot away from a bingo. A very, very easy one to get. I got a spot of red ink on my finger. That's a close one. Yes, it is. She's clever and way more vindictive. I mean, she's never lit anyone on fire as far as we're aware. Oh, Benedick. That's vengeful, not vindictive. Oh, okay. High five. When did we see the bear cult? When we were in... A lot of them were in Cherrick. Lots of them in Cherrick. And also in... is it Aloria? Not Aloria. Where this... Algaria. In Algaria, the guy that came in and demanded to be given the orb, and then Erend was like, okay. And he was like, bleh! He was a member of the bear cult, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, that guy. Oy, that guy. Yeah, they wear a lot of bear skins. They shuffle around and chant. I think they worship Belar. Well, it's an Alorn religion, right? Because Algaria and Cherrick are both parts of what was once, I guess, Aloria or whatever, right? They all sort of fall under Belar's purview. It was just they all got split up when Cherrick and his sons went and got the orb that one time, and then they split up into different nations in order to protect the orb. So that's Riva, Cherrick, Drasnia, Algaria, technically not Sendaria. Any others? Let me take a quick look at the map. It was Cherrick and his 4 sons, right? So Cherrick, Riva, Drasnia, Algaria, and was it Arendia? Did I say Drasnia? I think I did. Cherrick, Riva, Drasnia, Algaria, and I think I want to say Arendia, but that doesn't feel right. Still, is that the first multinational institution? I mean, yeah, I guess so, right? Because, again, it's like everyone sort of followed, each nation originally followed a god, kind of, was the way it worked. And then, so that one followed Belar, which is sort of what the bear cult worships. But because that one group split into, I guess, 5. Um, but yes, yeah, I think so. They have shown up in a few places. Um, I don't remember seeing them in Riva. They might not have been allowed in Riva. I'm not certain about that because of the whole protect the orb thing, and you know, the bear cult has their own view on how to do that. Yeah, it must be Arendia because I don't remember Arendia having another god, so it must be Arendia. Though I'm not certain about that. It's in one of the prologues. Alright, so we haven't actually finished the chapter yet. In the days that followed, the usually bleak halls of the citadel were filled with color, as official visitors and representatives teemed through them, chatting, gossiping, and conducting business in out-of-the-way corners. It's good to see Belgrath happy again. Yeah, he liked that, apparently. He's a little bit of a... He likes it when people make other people unhappy as long as it doesn't affect him personally too severely. He likes others being uncomfortable. There's a phrase I would use, but it's not, PG. Schadenfreude. Alright, where was I? Out of the way corners. The rich and varied gifts they had brought to celebrate... That's the one, yeah. To celebrate the occasion, filled several tables lining one of the walls in the great throne room. Garion, however, was unable to visit or to examine the gifts. He spent his days in a room with his advisors and with the Tolnedron ambassador and his staff as the details of the official betrothal document were hammered out. Valgon had seized on Garion's break with tradition and was trying to wring the last measure of advantage from it, while Brand was desperately trying to add clauses and stipulations to rigidly circumscribe Sinedra's authority. As the two haggled back and forth, Garion found himself more and more frequently staring out the window. The sky over Riva was an intense blue, and puffy white clouds ran before the wind. The bleak crags of the island were touched with the first green blush of spring. Faintly, carried by the wind, the high, clear voice of a shepherdess singing to her flock wafted through the open window. There was a pure, unschooled quality to her voice, and she sang with no hint of self-consciousness, as if there were not a human ear within 100 leagues. Garion sighed as the last notes of her song died away, and then returned his attention to the tedious negotiations. His attention, however, was divided in those early days of spring. Since he was unable to pursue the search for the man with the torn cloak himself, he was forced to rely on Leldoran to press the investigation. Leldoran was not always entirely reliable, and the search for the would-be assassin seemed to fire the enthusiastic young Asturian's imagination. He crept about the citadel with dark, sidelong glances, and reported his lack of findings in conspiratorial whispers. Turning things over to Leldoran might have been a mistake, but there had been no real choice in the matter. Any of Garion's other friends would have immediately raised a general outcry, and the entire affair would have been irrevocably out in the open. Garion did not want that. He was not prepared to make any decisions about the assassin until he found out who had thrown the knife and why. Too many other things could have been involved. Only Leldorin could be relied upon for absolute secrecy, even though there was some danger in turning him loose in the Citadel with a license to track someone down. Leldorin had a way of turning simple things into catastrophes, and Garion worried almost as much about that as he did about the possibility of another knife hurtling out of the shadows toward his unprotected back. Among the visitors present for the betrothal ceremonies was Sinedra's cousin, Zara, who was present as the personal representative of Queen Xantha. Though shy at first, the Dryad soon lost her reserve, particularly when she found herself the center of the attention of a cluster of smitten young noblemen. Chaos merchants. Nice. The gift of Queen Xantha to the royal couple was, Garion thought, somewhat peculiar. Wrapped in plain leaves, Zara presented them with 2 sprouted acorns. Sinedra, however, seemed delighted. She insisted upon planting the 2 seeds immediately, and rushed down to the small private garden adjoining the royal apartments. "It's very nice, I suppose," Garion commented dubiously as he stood watching his princess on her knees in the damp loam of the garden. His princess. Busily preparing the earth to receive Queen Xantha's gift. Sinedra looked at him sharply. "I don't believe your Majesty understands the significance of the gift," she said in the hatefully formal tone she had assumed with him. "Stop that," Garion told her crossly. "I still have a name, after all, and I'm almost positive you haven't forgotten it." "If your Majesty insists," she replied loftily. "My Majesty does. What's so significant about a couple of nuts?" She looked at him almost pityingly. "You wouldn't understand." "Not if you won't take the trouble to explain it to me." "Very well." She sounded irritatingly superior. "The 1 acorn is from my very own tree. The other is from Queen Xantha's." "So?" "See how impossibly dense he is," the princess said to her cousin. "He's not a dryad, Sinedra," Zara replied calmly. "Obviously." Zara turned to Garion. "The acorns are not really from my mother," she explained. "They're gifts from the trees themselves." "Why didn't you tell me that in the first place?" Garion demanded of Sinedra. She sniffed and returned to her digging. "While they're just young shoots, Sinedra will bind them together," Zara went on. "The shoots will intertwine as they grow, embracing each other and forming a single tree. It's the dryad symbol for marriage. The 2 will become 1, just as you and Sinedra will." "That remains to be seen," Sinedra sniffed, trowling busily in the dirt. Garion sighed. "I hope the trees are patient." "Trees are very patient, Garion." Zara replied. She made a little gesture that Sinedra could not see, and Garion followed her to the other end of the garden. She does love you, you know, Zara told him quietly. She won't admit it, of course, but she loves you. I know her well enough to see that. Why's she acting the way she is, then? She doesn't like being forced into things, that's all. I'm not the one who's forcing her. Why take it out on me? Can you think of anyone else she can take it out on? Garion hadn't thought of that. He left the garden quietly. Zara's words gave him some hope that one of his problems, at least, might eventually be resolved. Sinedra would pout and storm for a while, and then, after she had made him suffer enough, she would relent. Perhaps it might speed things along if he suffered a bit more obviously. Whom else? Whom else? Wow, that's actually, yeah, that's because mine says, can you think of anyone else she can take it out on? And yours says, whom else can she take it out on? That's an interesting adjustment. Not really sure in this case which one I prefer. Yeah. Yours is slightly more succinct. But yeah. These little bits of like post-publication editing are so odd. Alright, so perhaps it might speed things along if he suffered a bit more obviously. Somewhat later, he received word that Aunt Pole wanted to see him in her private apartment. He went immediately, and found her seated by the fire, sewing as usual. Belgarath, dressed in his shabby old clothes, sat in one of the deep, comfortable chairs on the other side of the fire, with his feet up and a tankard in his hand. Whenever he can, Belgarath seems to live very comfortably. I'm missing half a paragraph. That's not a small amount, presumably. Is it easier for you to type it out or just take a picture of it? Apparently the editor really did strike here. Right? I'll take a picture. All right. I have Messenger open and ready. Photo received. Okay, let's see. Whom else can she take it out on? Garion hadn't thought of that. He left the garden quietly. Sarah's words had gave him some hope that one of his problems, at least, might eventually be resolved. Sinedra would pout and storm for a while, and then, after she had made him suffer enough, she would relent. Perhaps it might speed things along if he suffered a bit more obviously. The other problems had not changed significantly. He was still going to have to lead an army against Kaltorak. Belgarath had still given no sign that his power was intact, and someone in the citadel was still, so far as Garion knew, sharpening another knife for him. He sighed and went back to his own rooms where he could worry in private. Interesting. I can see why it's been cut out, because I feel like those are all things that have already been, covered a few times. So it does feel a little redundant. I don't think we really lose much by not having it there. But it's interesting that it's gone as well. I wonder if it's just for this, double book edition, if they needed to, shave some stuff down as a result of, cramming 2 books into one. That's my guess. But yeah, that's a little odd. Well, wait. I'm just a dummy. It literally had not been edited out. My brain is the one that edited it out, apparently. I looked over it. When you said I was missing half a paragraph, I went back and looked. And somehow I don't know how I did that. Missing it the first time I can get, because I'm frequently looking up and around and checking chat and whatnot. But the second time is really confusing. You told me I'd skipped it, and I skipped it again. Apparently I just did not want to read that. So, it doesn't add much, but it is still there. I got no explanation for that. I'm sorry. Wasted a bit of time. Alright, so he sighed and went back to his own rooms where he could worry in private. Somewhat later he received word, Aunt Pole, blah blah blah. Belgrath has his feet up, tankard in hand. You wanted to see me, Aunt Pole? Garion inquired as he entered. Yes, dear, she replied. Sit down. She looked at him somewhat critically. He still doesn't look much like a king, does he, father? Give him time, Pole, the old man told her. He hasn't been at it for very long. You both knew all along, didn't you? Garion accused them. Who I was, I mean. Naturally, Aunt Pole answered in that maddening way of hers. Well, if you'd wanted me to behave like a king, you should have told me about it. That way I'd have had some time to get used to the idea. It seems to me we discussed this once before, Belgarath mentioned. A long time ago. If you'll stop and think a bit,
I'm sure you'll be able to see why we had to keep it a secret.
Maybe. Garion said it a bit doubtfully. All this has happened too fast, though. I hadn't even got used to being a sorcerer yet. And now I have to be a king, too? It's all got me off balance. You're adaptable, Garion, Aunt Pole told him, her needle flickering.
You'd better give him the amulet, Pole,
Belgarath mentioned.
The princess should be here soon.
I was just about to, Father, she replied, laying aside her sewing. What's this? Garion asked. The princess has a gift for you, Aunt Pole said. A ring. It's a bit ostentatious, but act suitably pleased. Shouldn't I have something to give her in return? I've already taken care of that, dear. She took a small velvet box from the table beside her chair. You'll give her this. She handed the box to Garion. Inside the box lay a silver amulet, a bit smaller than Garion's own. Represented on its face in minute and exquisite detail was the likeness of that huge tree which stood in solitary splendor in the center of the Vale of Aldor. There was a crown woven into the branches. Garion held the amulet in his right hand, trying to determine if it had the same kind of force about it that he knew was in the one he wore. There was something there, but it didn't feel at all the same. Are you listening to me read the book? Extra audience member? It doesn't seem to be like ours, he concluded.
It isn't,
Belgarath replied.
Not exactly, anyway. Sinedra's not a sorceress, so she wouldn't be able to use one like yours.
You said, not exactly. It does have some kind of power, then?
It will give her certain insights, the old man answered, if she's patient enough to learn how to use it.
Exactly what are we talking about when we use the word insight?
An ability to see and hear things she wouldn't otherwise be able to see or hear,
Belgarath specified. Is there anything else I should know about it before she gets here? Just tell her that it's a family heirloom, Aunt Pole suggested. It belonged to my sister, Beldaran. Remember here that Garion asked, is there anything else I should know about it before she gets here? He did ask. You should keep it, Aunt Pole, Garion objected. I can get something else for the princess. No, dear. Beldaran wants her to have it. Garion found Aunt Pole's habit of speaking of people long dead in the present tense a trifle disconcerting, so he didn't pursue the matter. There was a light tap at the on the door. Come in, Sinedra, Aunt Pole answered. The little princess was wearing a rather plain green gown open at the throat, and her expression was somewhat subdued. Come over by the fire, Aunt Pole told her. The evenings are still a bit chilly this time of year. Is it always this cold and damp in Riva? Sinedra asked, coming to the fire. We are a long ways north of Talhoneth, Garion pointed out. I'm aware of that, she said with that little edge in her voice.
I always thought it was customary to wait until after the wedding to start bickering,
Belgarath observed slyly.
Have the rules changed?
Just practicing, Belgarath, Sinedra replied impishly. Just practicing for later on. The old man laughed.
You can be a charming little girl when you put your mind to it, he said.
Sinedra bowed mockingly. Then she turned to Garion. It's customary for a Tolnedran girl to give her betrothed a gift of a certain value, she informed him. She held up a heavy, ornate ring set with several glowing stones. This ring belonged to Ran Horb II, the greatest of all Tolnedran emperors. Wearing it might help you to be a better king. Garion sighed. It was going to be one of those meetings. I'll be honored to wear the ring, he replied as inoffensively as possible. And I'd like for you to wear this. He handed her the velvet box. It belonged to the wife of Riva Irongrip, Aunt Pole's sister. Sinedra took the box and opened it. Why, Garion, she exclaimed, it's lovely. She held the amulet in her hand, turning it to catch the firelight. The tree looks so real that you can almost smell the leaves.
Thank you,
Belgarath replied modestly. You made it? The princess sounded startled. The old man nodded.
When Polgara and Belderan were children, we lived in the Vale. There weren't very many silversmiths there, so I had to make their amulets myself. Aldur helped me with some of the finer details.
This is a priceless gift, Garion. The tiny girl actually glowed, and Garion began to have some hope for the future. Help me with it, she commanded, handing him the two ends of the chain and turning with one hand holding aside the mass of her deep red hair. Do you accept the gift, Sinedra? Aunt Pole asked her, giving the question a peculiar emphasis. Of course I do, the princess replied. Without reservation and of your own free will? Aunt Pole pressed, her eyes intent. I accept the gift, Lady Polgara, Sinedra replied. Fasten it for me, Garion. Be sure it's secure. I wouldn't want it to come undone.
I don't think you'll need to worry too much about that,
Belgarath told her. Garion's fingers trembled slightly as he fastened the curious clasp. His fingertips tingled peculiarly as the two ends locked together with a faintly audible click. Hold the amulet in your hand, Garion, Aunt Pole instructed him. Sinedra lifted her chin, and Garion took the medallion in his right hand. Then Aunt Pole and Belgarath closed their hands over his. Something peculiar seemed to pass through their hands and into the talisman at Sinedra's throat. Now you are sealed to us, Sinedra, Aunt Pole told the princess quietly, with a tie that can never be broken. Sinedra looked at her with a puzzled expression, and then her eyes slowly widened and a dreadful suspicion began to grow in them. Take it off, she told Garion sharply.
He can't do that,
Belgarath informed her, sitting back down and picking up his tankard again. Sinedra was tugging at the chain, pulling with both hands. You'll just scratch your neck, dear, Aunt Pole warned gently. The chain won't break. It can't be cut, and it won't come off over your head. You'll never have to worry about losing it. You did this! The princess stormed at Garion. Did what? Put this slave chain on me. It wasn't enough that I had to bow to you. Now you've put me in chains as well. I didn't know, he protested. Liar! She screamed at him. Then she turned and fled the room, sobbing bitterly. I don't like that part, personally. I don't know why Aunt Pole and Belgarath did that the way they did that. I feel like if there's a reason that she needs to be wearing that amulet. They should have explained that reason and not, like, tricked her into it. I don't know if Garion must stay in an uncomfortable situation. Kind of feels like Sinedra must stay in an uncomfortable situation. Like, just such a. He's here, like, stressing all this time about how he's going to get along with Sinedra in this marriage. And then, again, before they're married, Aunt Pole and Belgarath do that. It's just not not helpful. They're weird sometimes. Like, their thought process for some things is just. And he asked too, right? Like, I pointed it out when it was at when he asked, "Is there anything else I should know about this before she gets here?" Just say it's belonged to my sister. Yeah, you know. Right. Since last time, also, I've been kind of thinking a little bit about because, like, last time when Garion fired up the sword for the first time, and we were kind of looking at the cover art, and then I was saying, I feel like these books are at least somewhat. Were they afraid she would take off? Well, I mean, like, Garion wears wore at least initially, but he had to wear his for protection, right? It kept mental influence off of him. Um, was sort of the initial reason, I think, and then so it could be a protective amulet, right? Belgrath also said it would give her insights if she learned how to use it, which is a little vague. But yeah, I'm not sure. Is it a tradition thing? Did all of the Revan kings have their wives wear this amulet, or is it just Sinedra? Like, there's a lot of information. I don't know. Yeah, no, I partly I'm gonna chalk it up to they're both thousands of years old, and sometimes they just, I guess, take the long view of things and don't worry about certain details that maybe they should. That's the reasoning I'm going to go with for now. Until maybe we'll hear something further about it later. Um, but yeah, their method of presenting it is definitely flawed. Oh boy, I wasn't looking forward to that particular moment. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, there is that. I mean, usually, I was gonna say usually Aunt Pole is better with people, but I mean, sometimes she does that through the cold, direct approach, right? Sometimes she does things in a very no nonsense manner. But, like, they treated it as a gift. Um, and I don't know, it's a pretty underhanded seeming gift at this point. So, anyways, yeah, what I was saying before. I was thinking about these books being influenced by Star Wars. I don't know if that's actually the case. It's just what I'm seeing myself. I haven't read anything about this. I haven't really seen much discussion of these books, but I haven't gone out of my way to look for it either. Um, but I was thinking because the obvious is like the sword of the Revan King, which is not exactly. It's actually a metal sword that just has blue flames, and maybe I wouldn't even really think about it in that way if it weren't for this like artwork, which I was thinking it was something fertility related. Um, this artwork definitely makes it look Star Warsy, right? But I was thinking about Torak with his burned face and his metal mask, Cal Torak. Um, Definitely bears a certain resemblance to a significant Star Wars figure. Well, hmm. We'll see. We'll see how that goes. But because I'm not going to say anything about what the amulet is actually for or anything like that, but just the presentation of it. Yeah. Yeah, the binding her to their family is an odd line. Like, what? Is this going to make sure that they never divorce? Which I don't know if is a concept in that world. Yeah, I don't know. It's a bit weird. I don't think it qualifies for kidnapping, though. Binding, not kidnapping. I feel like it does sort of like there has been a little bit of a theme of I feel like Sinedra not fully trusting that family connection between them. Not the connection, but like there was the thing with Tonedrins and not really believing in magic and whatnot. Um, hmm. Yeah, yeah. She didn't really like. There was that. Um, I don't know. I suppose for a while she kind of thought maybe Belgarath was a bit of a hoax. But anyways, yeah, I don't know. If I'm like going out of my way to draw parallels between this and Star Wars, I mean, sorcery compared to the Force, right? Belgarath compared to say like Obi-Wan. I wouldn't say that I can think of off the top of my head an equivalent Front Pole or, many of the other characters. I promise you, this isn't a spoiler, but I promise there's no like blood relation between Garion and Sinedra. They're not secretly somehow siblings. SSS. She wasn't adopted into the house of Ranboroon. It's definitely not one for one. Like, I wouldn't say that I think that this is at all like stealing from Star Wars. At the most, if it is the case, I would say it's influenced by. But I can see certain parallels. And lots of things that there aren't parallels. Anyways, it's past 8:30. Oh, I'm a little sleepy. So I'm going to wrap things up there. Other than everybody being rightfully upset with Polgara and Belgarath, I hope we're all having fun. And I should be back on Friday. I can't think of any reason not to. The 20th. So hopefully I'll see you then. So enjoy the rest of the week. Have a good evening. Have a good sleep tonight, everybody. Look at his little tail. He's like, oh, I hear the wrap-up speech. It means you're almost done. All right, thank you. Good night. See you Friday. Bye.